2021 is now called to order. This meeting is being conducted using teleconferencing and electronic means consistent with the state of California's Executive Order N2920 dated March 17, 2020 regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. The live stream of the meeting may be viewed on Comcast Channel 15 and or online as noted on the agenda. In accordance with the order, the public may only view the meeting on television or online and not in council chambers. We're conducting tonight's meeting in a virtual setting using Zoom. All planning commissioners and staff are participating from remote locations, and all voting will be conducted by roll call vote. Director Paulson, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Thomas.
Present.
Commissioner Suzuki.
Here.
Commissioner Hanson.
Here.
Commissioner Barnett.
Here.
Chair Janoff.
Here.
And let the record reflect that currently Commissioner Tavana and Vice Chair Birch are not with us. However, it looks like Vice Chair Birch is now arriving.
So while we wait for her to join, I'll just continue then. As the Planning Commission conducts this meeting on behalf of the Town Council and residents of Los Gatos, we encourage active participation, which is essential for democracy and critical to the work of the Planning Commission. Your participation can occur through written comments about agenda items submitted to staff prior to a meeting. During the meeting, there are two opportunities for members of the public to participate. During verbal communications period, an individual may speak on an item not on the agenda. And during the public hearing on a specific agenda item, any member of the public may speak about that item which is on the agenda. If you wish to address the commission tonight during verbal communication or during the consideration of an agenda item, you must join the Zoom webinar via the link and password provided on page 2 of the staff report. When I announce the item for which you wish to speak, please click the raise hand feature in Zoom, and if you're participating by phone, press *9 on your telephone keypad. When called to speak, please state your name and address for the record. Alternatively, you may choose to speak anonymously. It is requested that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. We've now come to the verbal communications portion of the agenda. And at this time, members of the public are invited to address the commission on any issue not on the agenda. Director Paulson, do we have anyone wishing to address the commission tonight?
Thank you, Chair. I'll give it a couple seconds here. I do not see any raised hands yet. Seeing no raised hands, I think we can move on.
All right, thank you. The next item is the consent calendar. We have one item to be acted upon tonight with a single motion, and that's the draft minutes of the June 23rd, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Does any commissioner or member of the public wish to pull the item from the consent calendar?
No public members, Chair, are wishing to pull the consent item.
All right, thank you. And I don't see any hands of commissioners. Seeing none, may I have a motion for approval of the consent calendar? Commissioner Barnett.
I'll move to approve the consent calendar being the
Thank
minutes
you.
of the last meeting.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
Second.
Thomas. Thank you. We'll now take the roll call vote. Commissioner Hanson.
I'm going to abstain as I was not present at the meeting.
Commissioner Barnett.
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Commissioner Suzuki.
Yes.
Vice Chair Birch.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well, and the motion passes. We're now moving on to public hearing, agenda item number 3. This item is to consider approval of a request for modification to an existing architecture and site application S13-090 to relocate an existing pre-1941 single-family residence from property on the northern portion of the North 40 specific plan area to a property in the approved first phase of the North 40 specific plan area with additional below-grade square footage, a reduction of parking spaces, and the removal of one housing unit on property zoned North 40. Specific plan located at 15011 Los Gatos Boulevard, APN 424-56019. Architecture and site application is S20-035. Property owner is the Yuki family and care of Edward Morimoto. Applicant is Don Capabores, Harmony Park Development, and the project planner is Ryan Safdie. First, may I see a show of hands from commissioners who have either visited the site or review the story poll information provided to us by Mr. Safdie via email. All right, thank you for that. I understand Mr. Safdie will be giving the staff report tonight.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. Before you tonight is a proposal to relocate an existing pre-1941 residence from 14919 Los Gatos Boulevard, located within the northern portion of the North 40 specific plan area, to the subject property 15011 Los Gatos Boulevard, located within the transition district of the approved phase 1 of the North 40 specific plan area. The relocation request would require modifications to the existing Arkansas application for the approval of phase 1 of the North 40 specific plan. The Arkansas application for phase 1 approved 2 attached live work units at this location, consisting of office space on the ground floor and residential units on the second floor. The applicant is proposing to replace these 2 live work units with the existing 2-story residence located at 14919 Los Gatos Boulevard. The existing 2-story residence would be moved and converted to a mixed-use building with a new below-grade commercial area, the first floor converted to office space, and the second floor used as a residential unit. A new elevator and open courtyard is also proposed, and all proposed uses are permitted uses per the North 40 specific plan. The proposed project would modify the existing phase 1 Arkansas application as follows: reduce the number of approved residential units from 320 to 319, lower the approved building height by nearly 10 feet, decrease the proposed residential floor area by 8 square feet, increase the proposed commercial floor area by nearly 2,000 square feet, remove 11 parking spaces, alter the approved side and rear setbacks, increase the proposed open space by over 300 square feet, and increase grading associated with the excavation for the new below-grade commercial area. The staff report provided an in-depth analysis on the increase of commercial floor area, the reduction of parking spaces, and the alterations to setbacks. In summary, the proposed increase in commercial floor area complies with the North 40 specific plan, as phase 1 approval was nearly 400,000 square feet under the maximum allowed development capacity of the North 40 specific plan. The proposed reduction of 11 parking spaces complies with the North 40 specific plan, as there would still be an excess of approximately 162 parking spaces over what town code requires. And the proposed setbacks comply with the North 40 specific plan, as the only setback requirement is 25 feet along South Turner Street, which would not change with this application. Additional excavation and grading around the project site is also proposed. The applicant will need to work with Parks and Public Works to determine if any revisions to that existing grading permit are required. Story poles were erected and public comments were sent to the neighboring property owners and tenants. No public comments have been received for this application. Based on the discussion in the staff report, staff recommends approval of the application with the required findings and subject to the conditions of approval. And this concludes staff's presentation, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that report, Mr. Safdie. Do any commissioners have questions for Mr. Safdie or staff at this time? Commissioner Hanson.
I have 2 questions. My first question is a simple one. In the same area where the proposed relocation was to occur, there's a couple of other buildings, building A1 East and building A1. What are the permitted uses for those buildings?
So if Mr. Safdie would like me to interject. So there are multiple buildings adjacent to this proposed relocation is a mixed use building, which has residential and commercial. And so it's all the permitted uses within the specific plan in the transition district. So that's a pretty wide variety of allowed uses. Did you have a specific question on a use that may or may not be appropriate there?
No, I can ask the applicant what their intent would be. Then, but you're saying basically it's anything that's permitted in the transition district. That right now they're just boxes without anything assigned to them. So
that's correct. Yeah.
And my other question is, back in the fall of 2020, we had a hearing about the North 40 parking garage, and in the appeal that happened with the town council, there was an application of the 2017 parking standards that were in place at the time that the application was approved. And what I'd like to ask is there any precedent for using that here now that that already happened?
So staff's interpretation has not changed the previous application. We did not agree with that interpretation. So ultimately, we believe that this parking reduction also complies with this specific plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. And are there any other questions for staff or at this time? All right, I don't see any hands raised. So we'll now open the public hearing and give the applicant up to 5 minutes to address the commission.
So Mr. Capobres has his hand raised, and so he can speak on behalf of the applicant.
Good evening, Chair Janoff, Vice Chair Birch, Commission members and staff. I'm Don Capobres of Harmony Park Development. Before I get into the presentation, I believe we're going to try to start off with a quick video which features Mr. Tom Yuki and how his father came to purchase the land on the North 40. So I'll turn it back over to staff.
The story of relocating in Los Gatos was the fact that he was going to buy a home in San Jose. He was on his way from San Jose to Los Gatos. He saw this for sale sign and he figured, well, there's no harm in stopping. And so he drove in to this farmhouse, and the first thing he saw was this Italian farmer, Victor Gianandrea, who could speak very little English. And so when Mr. Victor Gianandrea saw my father, he immediately took him down the basement. So they had a drink downstairs, and that's how he got the farm in Los Gatos.
We were happy to find that clip in the archives and happy to share it with you. I appreciate staff working with us to get that out. Again, I'm Don Capobres of Harmony Park Development. We have an office here in Los Gatos. We've had a long history on the North 40 and have worn different hats. But in our current role, we are developing the retail portion of phase 1, which we are now calling the Junction. Next slide. Today, we're here to present a proposal to move the Gianandrea house. These photos were taken earlier this year, and I think they really put the house in its best light. Next slide. The house currently sits in the phase 2 land of the North 40, and we propose to move it to the Junction. The land on which the house currently sits and the lot which it is being proposed to be moved to are owned by the Yuki family. Ed Morimoto of the Yuki family is also with me here today. And I was going to show the video then, but I'll just kind of jump into the next slide. So there was some confusion discussion about the date of construction of the house in the early historic reports for the North 40 specific plan and the related EIR. Based on our research and the family's oral history, we believe the house to have been constructed around 1943. This appears to have been confirmed with aerial photography reviewed by our legal counsel. As we note in the application materials, there is no historical significance to the house. There are no specific requirements for preserving the house in the North 40 specific plan. The house can be demolished and likely would be if it were not for this really unique opportunity to work with the Yuki family. With all that said, we are so very excited to have this opportunity to make a proposal to move it and largely preserve it in an ideal location in phase 1. Next slide. It's really easy to get excited about the opportunities here. As a new construction developer, it's difficult for us to create the patina or character of buildings constructed during a different era. With our goal of building an authentic and unique retail program on the North 40, this is an invaluable resource for us. So in addition to the Market Hall building, the Gianandrea house becomes another anchor and icon for this project. The house sits perfectly as a transition from the residential, still on the same slide, but that's fine, that Summerhill is building and the new commercial that we are building at the Junction. Provides us with more material to create place and interesting public space. And finally, it allows us to preserve the history of the North 40 on the North 40 while ensuring the Yuki family presence and heritage on the North 40 goes for another generation or more. Yep, this slide. So the house was never occupied until the family bought the land in 1945. In it, the family's patriarch, Takeo Yuki, ran the family business, which continues to this day. Ultimately, the ground floor of the house will become the Yuki family business office once again. One residence will remain on the second floor. In addition, the family wants to pursue commercial square footage below the house. If you visit the house now, you'll find a subterranean bar was part of the original construction. Oral history tells us that this was a speakeasy bar of sorts. Next slide. Your packet provides a lot of detail on the difference in elevations compared to what has already been approved, but just a couple more images of what's proposed. And then the next slide. And then the next slide. The additional commercial on the ground floor and the floor below that will help us create an interesting public space. We like to think of some of those interesting and quirky commercial spaces that are below the sidewalks in Boston or some other interesting cities. We believe that the additional setback between the new building that we're constructing, building A1, and the images on the screen, that's the building on the right, and the Jan Andrea house provides an opportunity to create a hidden gem in the alley between the two buildings. Under the approved plan, the space was too narrow and we never really considered the alley for placemaking. In the next slide, you get a better idea of what I'm trying to describe. So next slide, it might be a little bit blurry, but new building A1 is again to the right, Jan Andrea house is to the left, and the colored pavement can be an interesting public gathering space with street furniture, landscape, and opportunity for public art. So we're really excited about that opportunity.
And Chair Janoff, that is time, but if you would like to have this slideshow continued, then that is at your pleasure.
Yes, I would. Thank you. Please continue to the end. Thank you.
Sorry, two more slides. The staff report does a good job of outlining in detail the difference in the development parameters from what's already approved. So I'm not going to go through that, but obviously happy to answer those questions in questions and answers. Next slide. And so just, I'm going to wrap up here. In the previous meetings with Conceptual Development Advisory Committee and Historic Preservation Committee, and during our community outreach, the biggest impact that was discussed is the loss of the 11 parking spaces to accommodate the configuration of the house. And as a reminder, the parking program, and so this is the next slide, for phase 1 commercial, or as we call it, the junction, is not tied to a specific parcel, but rather a comprehensive parking program for the entire commercial component, all the components of the project. So you get an idea, you have street parking, you have the market hall structured parking, and you have some surface parking lots. Ultimately, the North 40 phase 1 has excess parking capacity, as has been mentioned. The loss of spaces can be absorbed elsewhere in the larger parking program. I think the last point I want to make is we now also believe that the 11 spaces that are lost, it's probably a worst case scenario, as the required 871 parking spaces, which are in the left-hand column of the next slide, are based on what was assumed to be constructed in the phase 1 retail program. So you can move to the next slide. And so as we get ready to submit for building permit, we now know that we were going to be building less square footage in the first phase retail, as we're deleting some second floor spaces in other buildings. And that square footage for those spaces could be transferred to the Jan Andrea house if we needed. Regardless, even if there are losses of spaces, there is excess capacity, and the trade-off of loss of spaces is well worth, we believe, the invaluable benefit that moving a house creates for the project. Sorry to go over time. For some reason, I thought I had 10 minutes, but that ends my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. I do want to thank the family for giving us, the Yuki family for giving us this great opportunity, and want to thank staff for their hard work in getting us to this point. So I'm joined by Ed Morimoto of the Yuki family, Maya Gendro from MBA Architects, our civil engineer Jackie Bays, and our director of construction, Greg Schenk, and we can answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, and thank you for the video. I think that was very, very moving and ties your proposal together quite nicely. Do any commissioners have questions for the applicant at this time? Commissioner Hanson.
Yes, thank you for your presentation and all the detailed information. It was very helpful to look at. I wanted to ask a question that I wish I would have asked when we heard this at the Conceptual Development Advisory Committee. Are there other live work units planned for phase one? It said there was 2 that were going to be replaced by this. Are there any other live work units planned for phase one?
No, those were the only 2 units that were proposed in phase one.
Okay. So with that in mind, since our general direction for the general plan is all about things like live work to reduce transportation and so on and so forth, I was wondering if you had considered any other locations to put the house at versus taking the residential away, the live work.
We had not considered that, and you know, the family didn't want to get limited on the residential component of the Ginandrea house. They wanted to keep options open and not have it just be occupied by a member of the family, the Yuki family. But we do believe in spirit that the Ginandrea house is live work with the residential and the commercial on the ground floor.
Okay, for 1 unit then.
Yes.
Okay, and then one last question. Where is the closest parking? If not that there's those, what was about 40 spaces now will be 11 less. Where's the closest parking if people were having to walk from their cars to go into that area where building A1 is and the new relocation? How far would they have to go?
That surface parking lot behind, I guess, to the south of building A1, I'm looking at slide 13 just for frame of reference, is the closest. There's street parking on Turner Street as well in front of the house.
Okay.
So no spaces were dedicated to a specific building.
Right, I understand that. I was just looking at proximity and how far people have to walk. So that was all my questions for now.
All right, thank you for that. Any other questions for the applicant at this time? I don't, Commissioner Barnett.
In the Conceptual Development Advisory Committee discussion, there was some mention of the possibility of having a plaque to give a recognition to the Yuki family and to the history of the building. I was wondering if that's still under consideration.
Yeah, we'd love to do that. The family and maybe Ed's probably, well, maybe I'm in a better position to answer that. We would love to do that for them. You know, they're extremely private and very humble. And, you know, moving the house there and having the family office kind of on the ground floor is a great way to kind of to celebrate their heritage on the site as well. But we'll see if we can get a plaque out there as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, I don't see any hands raised. So at this time, we'll move to public comments. Members of the public may choose to state your name and or your address or speak anonymously, but do understand that this meeting is being recorded for the public record. Director Paulson, do we have any members of the public who wish to speak at this time?
Thank you, Chair Janoff. No, I do not see any other hands raised at this moment. Let's just give it a couple seconds. Seeing no hands raised.
All right, thank you. So we will return to the applicant. Applicant, you have up to 3 additional minutes if you'd like to add any further comments. Do you wish to?
I think I'll address the one question that was raised by Commissioner Hanson on what is programmed in building A1 to the immediate north of the proposed location of the Ginandrea house. The second floor is programmed to be 8 residential units, with the ground floor being neighborhood serving commercial. So we don't have tenants in tow yet, but not dissimilar from what you would see in other mixed-use buildings in town, 2-story mixed-use buildings in town.
All right. Any other comments you'd like to make? Otherwise, we'll return to the commissioners for questions.
No, this might be the quickest North 40 related meeting I've had in my entire career. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you then. Commissioners, any additional comments for the applicant? All right. I don't see any hands raised. So at this time, we'll close the public hearing on this item and ask if any commissioners have questions of staff, wish to comment on the application, or introduce a motion for consideration. Well, since no one has their hands raised, oh, sorry, I'm going to just kick it off, Commissioner Barnett, and then I'll defer to you.
I've got a proposed motion. It's a little lengthy, but I would be happy to present it at the appropriate time.
Thank you for that. And before we got to that, I wanted to speak to say how pleased I am to see this come before the Planning Commission in the proposal that we have before us. Having served on historic preservation, when the consideration of what constituted an historic building to be preserved, along with Vice Chair Birch several years ago, and disappointed that none of the structures were designated to be retained. So when this came before historic preservation, I think both of us were very excited to see that the notion of how important the Yuki story is and how important it is to preserve that in some fashion. So I'm very, very enthusiastic about this project. I think it will do exactly as the developer is proposing, create a space, create a very special memorial to a very important part of Los Gatos history. So you might guess that I am in favor of this project. Commissioner Barnett, did you wish to make a motion, or would any other comments be? Vice Chair Birch.
Yeah, first I wanted to second your comments. Since we had the opportunity to see this when it came in front of the HPC, you know, I think bringing a lot of what many residents in town felt what they were losing, it brings a part of that back. Just preserving a part of the heritage of what that property has had. I think there's a lot of opportunities there to embrace parts of the history of Los Gatos and the families that made it great. And on top of that, gives a bit of diversity to the architecture and uses within the overall plan development. You know, I know there had been some questions about parking because, you know, a while back when Summerhill came and there were questions about the underground parking, but I did go back and check all the parking counts. You know, the property is overparked. And I feel this is a worthy trade-off. So I would be in support of the motion.
All right, thank you for those comments. Any other comments before Commissioner Barnett proposes a motion? All right then, Commissioner Barnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Birch, Chair Janoff. So I move to approve the request for modification to the existing architectural and site application S-13-090 to relocate an existing single-family residence from property in the northern portion of the North 40 specific plan area to a property in the transition district of the first phase of the North 40 specific plan, all as described in the staff report, with additional below-grade footage, a reduction of 11 parking spaces, and the removal of one mixed-use unit on property zone North 40 specific plan. The APN is 424-56-019, and the property owner is the Yuki family. I can make the required findings for CEQA because an EIR was prepared and certified for the North 40 specific plan, so no further environmental analysis is required. I can make the finding that the request is consistent with the general plan because policy VLR-3.4 encourages mixed-use development of commercial, office, and residential uses in the North 40 area. I can make the finding that the project is in compliance with the North 40 specific plan because 1, the uses are permitted in the transition district. 2, the project meets the requirements for a mixed-use development as provided in section 2.5.10. Per policy DG7, the design reflects the historic and agricultural heritage of the site and of the town of Los Gatos. 4, the application meets section 3.4.1 of the specific plan brand and neighborhood identity, as the construction elements draw from authentic materials and reflect the agricultural history of the site. The increase in square footage of commercial space is consistent with the specific plan. And 6, the reduction of the 11 parking spaces is still consistent with the specific plan. The setbacks are compliant with the North 40 specific plan, and the application provides for additional open space. And it's required by section 29.20.150 of the town code. The considerations in review of the architectural and site application were all made. And the application must conform with the conditions of approval set forth in Exhibit 3 of the staff report and must conform to the development plans in Exhibit 11 of the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you for that very comprehensive motion. Do I have a second? Vice Chair Birch.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Commissioner Hanson.
I just wanted to comment that although I think it's a very worthy idea to preserve the building and move it and continue it on through the future of the North 40, I'm not comfortable with the site selection or the loss of the live work units and the loss of for the residential unit, and also the parking that's in that immediate area is. It sounds like a little amount, but in that immediate area where those buildings are going to be, it's going from 40 to down by 25% or more. And so I would prefer to see it at another location where we didn't have to lose the parking and you lose the additional residential units. So I won't be supporting the motion.
All right, thank you for that. Any other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Suzuki.
I had similar thoughts on the loss of the live work units. That's all I have to say.
Commissioner Thomas.
I also had concerns about that. I'm not as concerned about the parking because in the greater area, it seems that there is an excess of parking already. But I also was concerned about the loss of the live work units and the one less living unit overall.
All right, thank you for that. I guess I would just add that if we were talking about the loss of more than one unit as a trade-off for what we're gaining in retaining an historically important story for the town, that I might have a similar concern. But we are talking about just one unit, and so I personally feel comfortable with moving forward on this motion. But we do want to continue to look for mixed use, and since the remaining portion of this development is a little bit fluid, it's possible that the developer may change some of their plans and reintroduce the mixed use with the live work, keeping in mind that the general plan for 2040, which is in draft circulation and will come to this body next, that plan does heavily encourage the mixed use. And so it would be consistent with the future of the town if the developer made any other considerations to add work-live units. Any other comments? Vice Chair Birch.
Only maybe to share that I agree with what you just said, Chair Janoff, about losing one unit and where we have the potential to make that up. And maybe just to share that over the last 8+ years and working with lots of different groups of people and people in the neighborhood and the community, there was a really big push to preserve some of the historic element of this property. It's been very important to a number of residents that have lived in town for a long time. And I do think we have some opportunities to pick up those units. It was that drive that was happening many, many years ago that makes me feel like this is a great application. And I'm hopeful we will pick up the single unit with many more live work units. But it also just provides, I think, this retaining of a deeply historic part of the town that so many people really felt passionately about.
All right, thank you for those comments, Vice Chair. Any other comments before I call for the vote? All right. So we have a motion on the table, and I will call the question by roll call. Commissioner Hanson,
I vote no.
Commissioner Barnett,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
No.
Commissioner Suzuki,
Abstain.
Vice Chair Birch,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. We do we do not have a majority vote. Director Paulson.
So we actually do have a majority vote. We have a 3-2-1. Commissioner Suzuki abstained. So I would just defer to the town attorney, but from my understanding, that still would be an affirmative motion.
And that is correct.
All right, thank you for that clarification. So the motion passes 3-1. All right, we'll now move on to other business.
So Chair, before we move on to other business, I just want to recite the appeal rights
Thank you.
for this. So anyone who's not satisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission can appeal that. The forms are available online. There's a fee for filing the appeal, and the appeal must be filed within 10 days.
All right, thank you for that. And now we'll move on to other business. So we're starting with the report from the Director of Community Development, Director Paulson.
Thank you. You mentioned the general plan has been released, the draft version. So we encourage all of you to look at that. They'll be coming before the Planning Commission sometime probably in the early fall. But please let your neighbors and friends know about it as well. There's a lot of changes. We have a lot of new housing units that we need to plan for, or at least accommodate via our rules. And so that can present some challenges in the future, but we want to make sure everyone's aware of that. We're also have kicked off our objective standards effort. We'll be having a subcommittee meeting with the subcommittee of the Planning Commission for those standards coming up shortly. We will also be kicking off the housing element update. And so we're getting ready in August. We'll go back to council to figure out what the makeup of the housing element advisory board will be. And so we'll be kicking off that effort as well. And that concludes my report.
All right, thank you for that. And for the benefit of the commissioners, the subcommittee that will be looking at objective standards consists of Vice Chair Birch, Commissioner Hanson, and Commissioner Barnett. And I wanted to just thank you for stepping up to volunteer to do that work. We're looking forward to those reports. And so we move on to subcommittee reports. In addition to service on the Planning Commission, members of the commission serve on several town committees. Do we have any reports tonight? No hands raised, no reports. All right, well, thank you for participating in this meeting and for all the work that you do for the town. This meeting is now adjourned.